Greetings webheads, my name is Dominic and today you're tuning in to the Comic Book Report, where we review comic books and graphic novels so you can get an idea of what to read. And today I finally get to share a video idea I've had for months now. Today we're talking about what I'm calling the year of the Spider-Man Omnibus. I'm not sure if, like myself, you are a Spider-Man Omnibus collector, but if you are, there's a good chance you've been aware of just the absolute glut of material we've had released for my favorite wall crawler. Now, I think nearly all the books in this video were released this year, with a couple notable caveats. There's some that I think came out the end of last year that I finally got at the beginning of this year, and then there's the cases of many reprints that I never had an opportunity to pick up in my collection, or things like that. And whether it was from selling old books, saving up money in general, gifts, or sponsored books from our sponsor, OrganicPriceBooks.com, these are the 15 Spider-Man Omnibuses I picked up in 2024. Before we dive in though, let's go ahead and just shout out that channel sponsor. Again, it was OrganicPriceBooks.com. If you're interested in picking up your own comic book collected editions, I highly encourage you to check out this website. You can find a link for it in this video's description, and if you see anything there you like, you can use my discount code at checkout, TheComicBookReport, to save $2 off of your order. Please note if you use my affiliate link or code to make a purchase, I will earn a small commission, but it's a fantastic way to support this channel. Thank you so much for considering. Now let's get started with today's omnibus list. First up today, we're going to be doing an omnibus I recently covered and reviewed on the channel. This is Spider-Man, the Complete Black Costume Saga Omnibus from Marvel. This was one of my most anticipated releases of the year. I did note in the actual review that this book does have a notable misprint. To my knowledge, every copy has one duplicate page at the expense of one page. That means there is one page that is just not included in this omnibus that is supposed to be. Now, that issue that has the misprint is collected in the Spider-Man vs. Venom Omnibus, in case you have that and still want to pick this up. I think even with the misprint, this was absolutely a worthwhile book for me. I'm still happy I paid for it, ordered it, and got to read it. I really enjoyed this period of Spider-Man. So this is like mid-80s Spider-Man. It picks up right after the events of the Marvel Superhero Secret Wars crossover event, wherein Peter Parker, Spider-Man, gets the black symbiote costume for the first time. And this omnibus basically spans the run while he has that alien costume, and it ends with him essentially losing that alien costume. So we have that entire bridge in this omnibus. It collects issues of The Amazing Spider-Man, Peter Parker, the Spectacular Spider-Man, Marvel Team-Up, and the first issue of Web of Spider-Man. It's a really fun book that has a really unique time and place in the history of Spider-Man. A lot of different writers and artists on this book. It's also really notable because we get to see some of the relationship with Peter Parker and the Black Cat, Felicia Hardy, which was another big draw for me with this book. I always wanted to read the issues where they're kind of coupled together, and you definitely get a good handful of that in this book. We also obviously have his relationship with the black costume, we have the return of Mary Jane Watson, and a lot of other great adventures with him, his supporting cast of characters, notable villains, things like that. Absolutely a great book. Hopefully Marvel will reprint this down the line, especially for those that are waiting for one without a misprint. I should say again, most of these copies just have a one-page misprint. I did actually hear of one friend that was missing like 17 pages of his omnibus, but as far as I know, I've only heard of that happening once. Could it happen again? I'm sure that's possible, so just be aware with this book, but I still had a blast with it. Next up on our Spider-Man Omnibus list today, we have an epic reprint coming out of the 90s. This is Spider-Man by David Michelinie and Erik Larsen. This is, like I said, the 2024 reprint of this omnibus, and this is the first opportunity I've ever had to have it in my own collection. This is a notable gap filler between the David Michelinie and Todd McFarlane omnibus, and on the other end of it, the David Michelinie and Mark Bagley Omnibus Volume 1. Both really fun books, and again, a really fun period in Spider-Man comics. This is like right at the early 90s, so this is that period of time where he does not have the symbiote costume anymore. Venom is one of his major villains. It's just a whole lot of fun, and this is another incredible 90s artist on the book here, taking the reins after Todd McFarlane, who just completely revamped how Spider-Man was understood visually. We have Erik Larsen stepping in, and what's really cool about Larsen in this work is that Larsen is still recognizably his own comic creator, illustrator, things things like that, but it does feel like he's trying to homage or have some level of visual continuity with what Todd McFarlane did before on the book. So what's really nice is if you read this end to end with that previous omnibus I mentioned, there is enough similarity here in the art styles that it's not too jarring of a transition. You definitely have some consistency there. I think Larsen just punches it up to another gear where we get like these just kind of ridiculous action sequences. I actually love how he depicts Venom. We have that kind of elongated, monstrous jaw, all the jagged teeth, that super long tongue. Not that McFarlane didn't dabble with that, but Larsen just takes it to this just whole other level. It's grotesque, it's epic, it's just visually stunning, and I can say that about a lot of his run here on the book. David Michelinie, of course, doing the writing for most of this omnibus, and I think that his writing is honestly one of my favorite Spider-Man writings. He did most of the 90s run on Spider-Man with all of these different amazing artists, but yeah, a really strong entry here. I can't wait to dive into this book more. I've read a couple of the issues in the past. I actually think I had some collected in an Epic collection some years ago, but I'm so excited to have them back in my collection in oversized format, and for me, there's a handful of issues here I've never read. Okay, keeping this list going, we have Spider-Man by David Michelinie and Mark Bagley Omnibus Volume 1. This is another omnibus that was first released this year at the time of the recording, 2024, and this is another one that I think a lot of people have wanted for some time. This is where we have Mark Bagley joining Michelinie on the run, and his Spider-Man, in my mind, is probably visually the definitive Spider-Man, and that's quite the boast, because there are so many incredibly talented Spider-Man artists, but when I think about Spider-Man, it's Mark Bagley's Spider-Man I see. I do think that that's largely in part due to his tenure on Ultimate Spider-Man with Brian Michael Bendis. I read that before I read some of his 90s stuff here. I love Ultimate Spider-Man. We're actually going to touch on Ultimate Spider-Man later in this video. But again, going back here and seeing his early Spider-Man stuff in the 90s, it was a real treat. There's moments where I can definitely tell this is the same Spider-Man artist that did that incredible run with Bendis years later, but I love seeing it in this kind of 90s context. A novelty too about this run here that I really liked is that we get a lot of great Spider-Man kind of partnerships and team-ups in this book. We have a lot of great kind of 5-6 issue multi-part series that just have these really epic, great storylines. We have Spider-Man teaming up with the New Warriors, with Moon Knight, with Punisher, with Iron Man, with Black Panther, with Captain Marvel, I think. We just so many different hero characters that it's a blast. And in the midst of that, we even still have Spider-Man solo adventures. Everything just works really well. It's so gripping, it's so entertaining, and this is some of the sharpest written work I've seen from David Michelinie on Spider-Man that I've read thus far. Again, always pretty strong for me. I really like his writing style for Spidey, but this run, this era here, was honestly one of my favorites. I really, really loved it. I can't wait to read the Volume 2, which I think comes out sometime next year in 2025. I think that's going to bridge the gap between this and the Clone Saga, if I'm not mistaken. Someone correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. But yeah, this is the David Michelinie, Mark Bagley Omnibus Volume 1. A ton of fun, and another one I've reviewed recently on the channel for those interested in more details. Now, did someone just say Clone Saga? Oh, that's right, it was me. Yes, and here we are talking about it. This is Spider-Man Clone Saga Omnibus Volume 1. This was another one of my most anticipated releases in this last year or so. I do actually think this reprint was released maybe at the end of 2023, if I'm not mistaken. I think there were some of these clone books that were released before 2024, but I certainly was able to finally get them in 2024. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and wrap those into this year of the Spider-Man Omnibus list, because this is when I picked them up. But yes, this is a reprint of an older omnibus release. For those that don't know, in the 90s, Spider-Man had a big, sprawling, kind of epic storyline that went on for a long time. Many Spider-Man readers say way too long. I know a lot of people cite this as a jumping off point for Spider-Man, and while I understand the criticism, I've always had a soft spot for the Clone Saga. I'm a really big fan of Ben Reilly, the Scarlet Spider, the clone Spider-Man, or is he the clone? Question mark. But yeah, I really like this period in Spider-Man's history. I don't know if it's because I'm a child of the 90s myself, but I just really love this era. I love the look of Scarlet Spider, especially that original kind of red with the blue hoodie costume. It's just so visually striking and interesting. I think the idea of a clone is really fun as well. This is also at a time where these symbiotes are just running amok, like Venom, Carnage, and more. So we got a lot of notable appearances from those guys. We have a lot of great mythos building within the Spider-Man universe as well, especially as it pertains to the Clone Saga, how the clones happened, who's the villains there, things like that. But this is where it starts it all. I know for me, I used to have the Clone Saga and the Ben Reilly era collected in these giant paperbacks Marvel was releasing. It's been many years now. I think the Clone Saga maybe had 5 or 6 volumes, and then Ben Reilly had another 5 or 6. At one point, I had them all in my collection. For paperback lovers out there, it would have been a dream. I honestly loved that set. I didn't quite finish reading all of it, but I did have it all collected at one point. When I got out of comics, I did sell them all, but I was waiting to get them back in my collection. When I heard about these omnibus reprints, I knew it was time to strike. And what was that? What were you saying? You want more Clone Saga? Well, I got great news for you. We have Spider-Man, the Clone Saga Omnibus Volume 2. Yes, we got Volume 2 reprinted as well. This is the second of that 2-volume set of Clone Saga, but it's kind of the Volume 2 of a 4-volume total set that includes the entire Clone era, because after this we have the Ben Reilly Saga Omnibuses Volume 1 and 2. Or is it Ben Reilly? I don't know how they title them. We'll get to that in a minute. But yes, this is the back half of that first era of the Clone Saga, and we start to have Ben Reilly built up even more, while Peter Parker, Spider-Man, gets into his own personal and professional conflicts throughout the omnibus. I really like the visual style here. You know, we're right at the cusp of getting into the more like kind of polished later 90s comic art that's maybe not always my favorite, but I do think this is kind of a sweet spot before we get fully into that era. I really do enjoy it. You know, it jumps right off the page. It's unbelievably like saturated and vibrant, which maybe turns some readers off. I can understand that. But I do just really like it. Like I said, I have a soft spot for this whole clone era, and I really liked just getting to know Ben Reilly more. I know this is a character that's recently come back in the world of Marvel Comics a couple years ago during the Spider-Man Beyond era. Anyway, just a really fun character. I don't know if Marvel has always totally understood what to do with Ben Reilly, but I know there are a lot of fans out there like myself who just really like the clone Spider-Man. I think that this also added so many just interesting wrinkles for the character of Peter Parker, grappling with the knowledge of his clone and what that means for himself, his legacy, his role in life. And we definitely have a lot of twists and turns with that, and we get to see more of that in this omnibus as well. I do think that this is an interesting volume because it doesn't have as much of the setup kind of origin stuff for the Clone Saga. I wouldn't say it's getting bloated already, but we definitely have more happenings going on before we kick over into the Ben Reilly Saga era. But yeah, a really fun book here. I'm so elated to have this in my collection. These were like a huge whale for me to collect, and when I heard Marvel was reprinting all of these, this was a big point that I was trying to save up for early in the year. Okay, as promised, next up we have Spider-Man Ben Reilly Omnibus Volume 1. Okay, so I guess they don't call it the Ben Reilly Saga. I'm not sure why that was in my brain. Maybe the Black Costume Saga Omnibus. Anyway, this is the first volume of the Ben Reilly Spider-Man stuff. This is when we really have him taking on the mantle just even more as Spider-Man in the Marvel Universe. This is just really fun for fans of Ben Reilly. We definitely have him center stage from this point, and this is where we just go even deeper into that kind of clone era stuff. I will admit that we're starting to get into the territory where my memory of some of these issues is a little looser. You know, I didn't read everything once we get over here as well, so I can't speak to just everything that goes on in these omnibuses quite yet. I am hoping to finish out this whole era, and again, having them all in omnibus, oversized hardcover format, it's a real dream. Honestly, these look fantastic on a bookcase. I'll try to show the spines of all these books at the end of the video for those interested, but yeah, it just looks really nice, and this is a really anticipated book. I know in the cases of some of these clone era omnibuses, some hadn't been reprinted in some time. So like me, there were a lot of collectors that were really hopeful for when Marvel started releasing these, I believe at the end of 2023 and into this year, 2024. But yeah, I mean, just look at the art. It's so visually stunning. They definitely experiment with a lot of the panel layout. We're starting to get into the kind of ballistic, action-y kinds of Marvel comics here, which isn't always my favorite subgenre, but I do definitely still dig it. It definitely has its merits. And again, I'm just a fan of this era. I'm a fan of Ben Reilly, and I just think it's really interesting. A lot of good twists and turns here, and just a lot of really fun stuff collected. And once these go out of print, I'm not sure when Marvel will reprint them again, so I definitely had to jump on these these, like I said, these were the books I saved for first in 2024. I don't know if I kind of spelled it out like that, but yes, this was like some of my main targets for this year, and really happy to have them in my collection. And hey, if you're still watching this video and you're enjoying it and you've yet to subscribe to the channel, I'd just like to invite you to do so. I'm always doing comic book list videos, comic book reviews, unboxing, shorts, live streams, and more. Thanks for considering. Now let's go ahead and keep this omnibus list going. Okay, next on our list we have Spider-Man, Ben Reilly Omnibus Volume 2. This is the second of 2 volumes of that Ben Reilly era omnibuses, and the fourth of the total 4 volumes for this greater clone era in Spider-Man. This wraps it all up, and again, I'm just so happy Marvel followed through, reprinting all 4 volumes of this set. Again, a real dream to have it all laid out before me in this hardcover format, and I wasn't sure if I'd ever get all the Clone Saga back in collected edition. Like I said, I had it all in paperback and it was a really beautiful set, so I'm really happy to have it back in the collection. Now I do still have to make my way through some of the content here, but still the art is really striking and I can't wait to finish this out. One thing I will use this video just to share a little bit more about Clone Saga, I really enjoy the agency these writers gave to Ben Reilly. I think it would have been easy to make him too much of a carbon copy of Peter Parker, but they have enough distance for this character. You know, I think in universe it was something like 5 years, give or take, between when Peter Parker was cloned and when Ben Reilly came back into his world at the start of this Clone Saga. Because he was created, I think, during a story back in like the 70s, if I'm not mistaken. It's been a while since I've read that. But presumably that clone died. We find out at the beginning of this that he never died. He just kind of went away, not wanting to take Peter Parker's life or have any confusion there. But anyway, those 5 years, they really use that as kind of a narrative influence for shaping who this character is. We have him dealing with so many other conflicts in life, just life in general, but life problems, trying to wade through his identity, what he is, who he is. So we have like a whole different kind of psyche and just person in the person of Ben Reilly. And I really like that. I think we get to see that fleshed out throughout this whole clone era, but I think it was a really kind of sophisticated way to handle a clone character. Like I said, it just worked for me. I love this character. I think this era is really fun. I understand the detractors, but again, for me, I'm just really excited to have this in Omnibus, and I've always kind of been a fan. Okay, huge thank you to all of you who made it through the Clone Saga with me, particularly if you do not like the Clone Saga. Anyway, we have more omnibuses to talk about that came out this year. This is the Spider-Man by J. Michael Straczynski Omnibus Volume 2 reprint. So this is a book that a lot of fans have wanted for a while. I know the Volume 1 was in print longer, I think a year or two ago, and so I was able to get the Volume 1 reprint when they reprinted, like I said, maybe 3 years ago, give or take, but I had missed out on the Volume 2 reprint. I think they did sometime before that. Anyway, they kind of stagger these reprints every so often, but I was really bummed not to get this one when it was in print a couple years ago when I got back into comic books. So I knew this was one I wanted. I really do love Spider-Man by JMS. It's definitely, well, arguably one of my favorite modern Spider-Man runs of all time. I put it up there with Ultimate Spider-Man as probably my favorite kind of jumping on points for newer readers if you want to read modern Spider-Man. And these issues are already, you know, maybe a couple decades old at this point or pretty close to it, which is pretty wild. But yeah, this is a really fun era for Spider-Man. This Volume 2 brings us through the events of Marvel's Civil War, which is one of my personal favorite Marvel events of all time, and we just get a lot of great stories in this book. I will say, I know that the JMS era of Spider-Man has kind of complicated reviews. I think the general consensus is it's a fantastic run, arguably marred by maybe 1 or 2 story arcs, and were those stories sort of pointed out or kind of made to happen by editorial. You know, I've heard a lot of just kind of anecdotes about that throughout the years. I think where I land on that is kind of somewhere in there. I think JMS overall, it's one of my favorite runs of all time. There's maybe 1 or 2 stories that I'm not overly fond of as far as what they suggest for the universe of Spider-Man. I think one of them is called Sins Past or Sins Remembered, something like that. It's in Volume 1. And then this Volume 2 does have the One More Day storyline, which is kind of an infamous storyline that sort of brings us to the end of this collection. It does a lot with the relationship between Peter Parker and Mary Jane that current fans still don't really love. And while I agree with that, I think it's still a pretty riveting story. I think JMS did a fantastic job throughout this entire run. And again, I was just super happy to have this in the collection. What's really cool with what Marvel did this year too is that the JMS Volume 2 leads right into this era of Spider-Man, which is Brand New Day. Yes, this is the Spider-Man Brand New Day Omnibus Volume 1. This is a first printing, newly released book here in the year 2024, and I was so excited when Marvel announced this. I think it got pushed back or delayed once or twice, but I knew this was one I would want to check out. Definitely one that was worth saving my money for. Now, this era is another one that gets a lot of mixed reviews or has a complicated history. I think it really stems from the fact that this came out right after what JMS did with Spider-Man and Mary Jane. Suffice it to say, without spoiling too much, it sets up a whole new status quo for Peter Parker, for Spider-Man, for his notable relationships in his life, or lack thereof. I do think this alienated a lot of loyal fan base that was following the adventures, misadventures of Spider-Man, because they felt like this sort of rolled back the clock or kind of reset the characters in some ways, so we lost some of the character development that a lot of people started to like. I do think that this was a terrific onboarding point, though, for newer readers who were trying to get into Spider-Man, but really maybe got bogged down with just years and years of history. So again, there's a lot of schools of thought on this era of Spider-Man. I can certainly appreciate the different arguments on this, but I was super eager to check this out. I did have some of this Brand New Day era collected in smaller, standard size hardcovers. I really liked what I read of it. We have a lot of different writers and artists during this period as well. We have kind of a popcorning of different creators, but I really like it. A lot of great top industry talent jumped on the book around this time, and this omnibus collects a ton of those different creators. We have a great span of issues here. Like I said, it is a good onboarding point for newer Spider-Man readers because they just refresh the status quo for him so much. So if you want to read some modern Spidey, maybe you missed out on JMS Volume 1 and this looks interesting to you, I do think that this is kind of a fun place to start Spider-Man. That might be a controversial opinion, but it's one I hold. I think it's really great. I love the art. I think it looks great in this oversized hardcover format, and this is definitely a book I hope to review on the channel once I finish it out. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see that. Let's keep this list going. Okay, next up today we have Spider-Man by Zdarsky Omnibus. This is another one I got fairly recently, was able to review for all of you, both here on my channel and on the channel OrganicPriceBooks.com. The OrganicPriceBooks.com review is more of an overview, doesn't really have any spoilers. The review on my channel goes into greater detail of a lot of the story arcs, things like that, with some spoilers present, if you're interested in checking that out. This omnibus is really unique for me, and another kind of great point to start for newer readers, and I say that where you don't really need to know a ton about Spider-Man to enjoy the stories in this book. What we have here is essentially the run on Spectacular Spider-Man that Chip Zdarsky did, all collected at the front of this omnibus. After that, we transition over to the Spider-Man life story issues. I had that collected in an oversized hardcover graphic novel, basically. I sold it when I got this omnibus, though, because of the double dip. But an incredible Spider-Man miniseries or maxi series. Nope, miniseries. Anyway, one of my favorite Spider-Man works that came out in recent years. It basically has Spider-Man aging in real time. Each issue is about a decade in the life of Spider-Man. So we start back in the 60s. I think we end somewhere in the 2010s. And it's just a really amazing story. It's outside the main continuity, but it was a really cool melding of a lot of Spider-Man's history, kind of refreshed, remixed in a lot of different ways. And again, it posits this world as if Spider-Man aged in real time. I think it's really a masterwork that I think is just a piece of classic Spider-Man literature for those that have been fans of the character. After that, this omnibus actually wraps up with the Spider-Man Spider Shadow miniseries. This is another kind of outside the main continuity story, but it's a lot of fun. It's basically what if Spider-Man never ditched the actual symbiote costume, and what happened if he kind of got corrupted by it and let it go out a little bit longer. It's a really fun miniseries that had a lot of twists and turns and directions I didn't expect personally, but I had a blast with this omnibus overall. I think Zdarsky really understood what makes Peter Parker and Spider-Man so great. There's a lot of levity and a lot of kind of tear-jerky heavy moments as well. We get the comedy and the tragedy that is Spider-Man, and I think that Zdarsky, like I said, just had a really good functional understanding of this. Really great artists attached to this book as well. A ton of fun. Next up on today's list, this is Spider-Man by Nick Spencer Omnibus Volume 2. This is Volume 2 of a 2-volume set that collects the back half of Nick Spencer's tenure on The Amazing Spider-Man. Really anticipated this book. I got the Patrick Gleason kind of variant cover edition for this omnibus as well. Love the look of that kind of webbed white Spider-Man silhouette. I just think it looks so sleek. But yeah, this is the back half of Nick Spencer's run. I'm actually still making my way through through this run. I actually read some of the Volume 1 last night before bed. I'm honestly really enjoying it a lot. I know Volume 1 has some art by Ryan Ottley, who was the artist for a lot of Invincible by Robert Kirkman. That was honestly a huge draw for me for this run in general. I know he does less here, if any, in the Volume 2, but we still have a lot of terrific artists included here. Really have enjoyed this run so far. Like I said, I'm still making my way through, so I haven't really gone through the Volume 2 yet here, but I am really excited to have it in the collection. I knew, especially collecting Volume 1, that I would definitely make a point to get the Volume 2 before it ran out of print, so happy I definitely picked this up. This is also sandwiched between the Volume 1 and the Spider-Man Beyond Omnibus, so if you have that as well, you can kind of read this in a big, long run, which is super fun. I always like kind of having gap fillers or finishing out comic creator runs, so this was a no-brainer release for me for this year, and I think this omnibus is just stunning. I do think that this might have a printing error as well. If I'm not mistaken, I think we're either missing a page or there's some dialogue that's like from a previous panel or something. There was something kind of weird, or the dialogue is right, but the art is wrong on a single page of it. I'm not really sure anymore, but again, just for those that are trying to avoid misprints, that's something to be aware of. I personally couldn't be happier to have it in my collection. That one little error is one I can easily overlook. But yeah, I'm really excited here, and I'm so happy that Marvel's been releasing some older runs and some of the really just newer runs that they've had for Amazing Spider-Man. I just think it's a really fun time to be a fan of Spider-Man in collected editions. Okay, I think at this point you can probably understand why I'm calling this the year of the Spider-Man Omnibus. This is Ultimate Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 3. This is so exciting. I can't remember if this came out the end of 2023 or early 2024. It's been a while. But I know that this was one I was trying to get in the collection for some time. It didn't quite make my budget a couple months in a row, but I finally had an opportunity to pick it up at a fair price. This is another series that I've read before. I used to have it all collected in trade paperback before I sold off most of my collection. Again, this was years ago when I thought I was out of the comic game. Haha, here we are now. But anyway, this is a run that I absolutely adore, the run here by Brian Michael Bendis and Mark Bagley. This is of course taking place in Marvel's Ultimate Universe, or I should say the first Ultimate Universe, as they have a new Ultimate Universe right now. But yes, this is the run Ultimate Spider-Man, and honestly, it's still going strong here. This is a little bit over halfway through the Spider-Man run, and it's still fantastic. The art's still interesting. I love what they do with the characters for this series. Again, this is one of the most beloved Marvel runs of all time, and I share that opinion. I think it's just so amazing, masterful, and interesting. I think Bendis is another creator that really understands what makes Peter Parker, Spider-Man, work. This is a series, too, that follows Peter Parker as a younger man. You know, he's back in high school like the original Spider-Man was back in the day, and this whole run takes place while he's still basically a high schooler, so he is a younger character, but no less heroic. His supporting cast of characters is fascinating, interesting. I always love the twists and turns we get there. We have all the appearances from his notable rogues gallery of villains, and again, sometimes refreshed in new and fascinating ways, being in this kind of alternate universe. A novelty, too, about Ultimate Spider-Man, if you're unaware, is that you can start reading it from issue 1 with no prior knowledge of Spider-Man necessary, because this starts at the very beginning with a 6-part Spider-Man origin story. This is, of course, in the Volume 1. But again, it's a great way to start a whole new thing for new readers wanting to check out Spider-Man. Even though he's not in the main 616 Marvel Universe, it still stands alone as one of the best Spider-Man runs of all time, at least in my mind. Okay, next on our list today is the Ultimate Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 4. This is probably not a surprise to some of you watching this video. Yes, I did pick up the Volume 4. This was a newer release that I actually just added to the collection in the last month or two, and I am elated. I did have the Death of Spider-Man Omnibus as well, which might be coming up in this video as well, spoiler alert. But basically, this was my big gap filler. This rounded out the rest of Ultimate Spider-Man for me because I have the Death of Spider-Man issues. I have all of the main issues in that run, which I think go from 1 to like 160 or something like that. There is supposed to be a Volume 5 Ultimate Spider-Man Omnibus. I'm not really sure how they're going to map or collect that compared to the Death of Ultimate Spider-Man Omnibus, but time will tell. We'll see if we get some announcements on that sometime in the future. But yeah, this is Volume 4. This continues on that epic run again by Bendis and Bagley, and this is still going really strong for me. I do think we have Bagley leave the title at one point in this book. I think they kind kind of reset the numbering for the issues for a little bit before going back to the Ultimate Spider-Man Legacy numbers. We have some interesting resets and refreshes in this. We have this dynamic toward the end of this book where we have Spider-Man starting to room with Bobby the Iceman and Johnny the Human Torch, and so that's a really interesting dynamic, all living with Aunt May. So this is an interesting time for Ultimate Spider-Man for me. I think that this omnibus has some of my favorite issues and some issues I'm a little more meh about, but even at its most meh, I think Ultimate Spider-Man is still one of the best comic runs of all time. I just absolutely love it, and to have it all in omnibus edition is a real dream. I know for a lot of collectors out there, we've really wanted this. They've released this, like I said, in smaller trade paperbacks like the ones I used to own. I think they had some Ultimate collections at one point. They had some oversized hardcovers. I think it was like a 12 or 13 volume set. And then they did have the Volume 1 Omnibus for a long time with no Volume 2 in sight. So the last year or two, as Marvel's been churning this out, everyone's just been really hopeful and eager for the day that we finally arrived at, where we have all of those main issues now collected in omnibus format. And yeah, really excited to have this book in the collection this year. Next on the list today, we have the Ultimate Spider-Man Death of Spider-Man Omnibus. What happens in this omnibus? Well, I bet you can maybe guess. This is a really decisive time in the life of the Ultimate Spider-Man. This is a really interesting turning point in the Ultimate Universe in general. After the stuff here, we have the kind of origins of the Miles Morales Spider-Man that takes place after this volume, although he may or may not make an appearance in this book. You'll have to read and see. But this is a really fun book as well. This is an interesting one. I think what it collects, they have not only the kind of final 10 issues or so of that first Ultimate Spider-Man run, but we also have an Ultimate Comics Avengers kind of crossover miniseries, or not crossover, like miniseries, like a 6-issue one there. We also have the Spider-Man Fallout miniseries, which I think is another 6 issues. This is a smaller omnibus overall. I know a lot of people have mixed reviews on this omnibus. Some people feel like that Ultimates and Avengers miniseries feels out of place or not needed here. I don't know. I think it's a really fun book. I'm still making my way through it. I did have this in an older printing some time ago that I sold off. So having it back in my collection now that Marvel did this reprint, I'm really excited. Like I said, to have it all in an omnibus format is really great. I mentioned it briefly in the last entry, but I have heard that Marvel is planning to do a Volume 5 of Ultimate Spider-Man, which would make this just considered more of an event book. The novelty here is that it does include the last 10 issues of Ultimate Spider-Man, so you can have the entire proper run of Bendis' Ultimate Spider-Man run in omnibus format if you have the first 4 volumes and this book here. Now, if they do a Volume 5, I'm not sure exactly what's going to be included. I imagine it'll have a lot of the same issues here, so there's some people that might prefer that book whenever we get more information about that release. But yeah, right now, I'm really happy with this. Will I get a Volume 5 and double dip? We'll see. I'm not really sure, but right now, I really like this book. Like I said, it is more of an event omnibus, but you still get a proper run of those issues as well. Again, a really important chapter in Marvel Comics, especially for the Ultimate Universe, and I think a lot of people that want to round out their collection, you could do worse than picking up the Death of Spider-Man Omnibus. Okay, friends, we're making it. This is the last lap, so go ahead and stretch. Thank you for being with me this whole time. But yes, this is the last Spider-Man Omnibus I picked up this year in 2024. This is Spider-Man 2099 Omnibus Volume 2. Yes, we got a Volume 2 for Spider-Man 2099, and honestly, I was on the fence about whether or not to pick it up. Now that I have, I am so excited I did, and I'm really excited Marvel released this. So we had the whole main run on Spider-Man 2099 that Peter David did, and I believe the 90s, all collected in the Volume 1. So you might be asking, what in the world is the Volume 2? Well, I'm happy you asked. We have kind of the miscellaneous Spider-Man 2099 material that was kind of written toward the end of, I think, the 90s. So we have that starting off this book. And I will say, for fans of the early Spider-Man 2099 stuff and that visual style, we have a lot of similarities at the beginning of this omnibus. The issues still feel kind of dated back to the 90s. But what's interesting about this book is we go from there, and then we collect issues of, I think, Captain Marvel, the kind of Genis Vell era that Peter David was also on, that there were some appearances of Spider-Man 2099, before going back to his proper, new series that came out in the 2000s era, 2000 10s-ish, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Again, written by Peter David in many cases here. So again, we have some continuity with the creators and the characters, which is really fun. No, this is not that original run. That is all included in the Volume 1, in case you are curious. These are the later adventures of Miguel O'Hara, Spider-Man 2099. I'm really excited to make my way further into this book. I've kind of flipped through it, but I am still finishing out that Volume 1. Yes, still, but I am loving it. I love this character, love the world we get. I know Volume 2 takes him to different places without spoiling too much. I also love seeing some of the modern artists we get on this book. Not that I don't love the pencil work we get from Rick Leonardi in Volume 1. I think that art is really striking as well. But seeing some modern artists try their hand at Spider-Man 2099 is also just a real blast. I really like the character design for this character, so I'm really eager to get to this book as well. When I heard it was talked about, I was on the fence, but ultimately I'm really happy I went ahead and picked up a copy. Okay, and as promised, I did want to go ahead and show you the spines of all 15 of my Spider-Man omnibuses I picked up this year. These are all the omnibuses I showcased in the video, just so you can take a look at what they might look like on a bookshelf. I might have some other omnibuses kind of spliced in between some of these entries, but again, these are all the books that I picked up in 2024 for Spider-Man in this omnibus format. Most of these were released this year or reprinted this year. I think a couple came out in 2023, apologies there, but I decided to loop them into this video because again, for me, these are the Spider-Man Omnis I picked up this year. A lot of really great reads here. I have read and reviewed a few on the channel, some of the content I've read in previous years myself, and there's a couple here that I'm still making my way through for the very first time. Suffice it to say, I have a lot of Spider-Man books to last me for a while, and there's still even more on the horizon going into next year. I think we're getting an amazing Spider-Man Omnibus Volume 6, which is super exciting. There's, I think, a Tom DeFalco Omnibus, if I'm not mistaken, solicited. I think we have Spider-Man by Joe Kelly Omnibus solicited. There's just so much coming out. It's honestly hard to keep track of, but I'm really excited. It's a great time to be a fan of Spider-Man if you also love this omnibus format. In the comments, I would love to know, did you pick up any of these books this year? Are there any Spider-Man omnibuses you're excited for going into next year? And also, what is your dream Spider-Man omnibus or omnibus series? If you could have Marvel print your favorite Spider-Man comics that have never been collected in omnibus format, what would that run be? What would that omnibus look like? I'd love to hear that in the comments. I think we can get some really fun discussions going. I tried something a little bit different with this video, but with all the omnibuses I picked up this year for Spider-Man, I just had to cover it. I've been wanting to do this videos for months. I hope you let me know what you think in the comments below, and thank you for watching. This has been the Comic Book Report. Please don't forget to give this video a like, that comment we talked about, and maybe share this video with a friend. Thanks for watching, everyone. Have a good one.